All right, algebra. So we're starting chapter 12, which is all about quadratic functions now. And we are starting with solving quadratic equations by factoring. The first equations that you guys learned to solve were linear equations, okay? Linear equations, remember, in the form ax plus b is equal to 0, okay? The left side of this equation is a binomial with a degree of 1, and so we refer to linear equations as first degree equations. Second degree equations are quadratic equations, okay? So a quadratic equation, and I'm just going to abbreviate that. A quadratic equation is an equation of the second degree. Its standard form, we always like to learn our standard form. So its standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, where a, b, and c are real numbers, and a does not equal 0, okay? What is the value of x in 3x is equal to 0? Well, if 3 times anything is equal to 0, then that x has to be 0. In the equation x times y is equal to 0, either x or y will be equal to 0, or possibly both of them will be equal to 0. This forms the basis of what we call the zero product property. And the zero product property is used to solve quadratic equations. The zero product property says if PQ is equal to 0, then either P is equal to 0 or Q is equal to 0. So example number 1 says solve x minus 5 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. So either this here in the parentheses, this sum is going to have to equal 0, or difference, excuse me, that's a difference, or this sum over here is going to have to equal 0 if that ends up being 0, okay? So we know x minus 5 is equal to 0, or x plus 2 is equal to 0. So over here, add 5, over here, subtract 2. So x is either 5 or x is negative 2. So x is equal to 5 or negative 2. That's the solution set for that. Okay, example number 2 says solve x squared plus 8x plus 12 is equal to 0. Okay, so what we have to do first is factor this trinomial. Factoring is not going away just because we're done with that chapter. So if you struggled on that, this might be a source of some frustration for you in this chapter, okay? When we factor out this trinomial, we get x plus 2 times x plus 6, because 2 times 6 is 12, and 2 plus 6 is equal to 8. Okay, so x plus 2 times x plus 6 is equal to 0. So what that tells us is either x plus 2 is equal to 0, or x plus 6 is equal to 0. Subtract 2, subtract 6. So x is either negative 2 or negative 6. Okay, if you substituted both of those back into the original equation, you would find that either of those gets you back to 0. Example number 3, solve 8x squared minus 16x is equal to 0. We have to factor this out. Okay, notice that 8x is a common monomial for both of those, so we're going to factor that out. 8x, we're left with x minus 2. Okay, so what that means is that either 8x is equal to 0 or x minus 2 is equal to 0. So 8x is equal to 0 or x minus 2 is equal to 0. Over here, divide by 8. Obviously, x over here is 0. Add 2 over here, x is equal to 2. So in example number 3, x is either 0 or 2. Okay. When solving a quadratic equation by factoring, you have to make sure the equation is in standard form first. So here's our rules. Number 1, Make sure the equation is written in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. 2, factor the polynomial side of the equation. 3, set each factor that contains a variable equal to 0 using that zero product property. 4, solve the resulting equations. And 5, check your solutions. Example number 4, solve 2x squared plus 8x minus 42 is equal to 0. This is already in standard form, so step 1 is done for us. Step number 2, factor the polynomial side of the equation. Please note that 2 is a common monomial of 2x squared, 8x, and minus 42. So we're going to factor out that 2 first to start factoring. 2 times x squared plus 4x minus 21 is equal to 0. Okay, now we factor x squared plus 4x minus 21. 2 factors of 21 that when we add them together equal positive 4. That's positive 7 and minus 3. So that is 2 times x plus 7 times x minus 3 is equal to 0. So what that tells us is that x plus 7 is equal to 0, or x minus 3 is equal to 0. Subtract 7 from both sides, add 3 to both sides, and we get x is equal to negative 7, or x is equal to 3. Okay, so x is negative 7 or 3. Example number 5. Okay, example number 5. 3x squared is equal to 147. Okay, 147. What we're going to do first is we have to write this equation in standard form. Okay, so we are going to set this equal to 0 by subtracting 147 from both sides. That gives us 3x squared minus 147 is equal to 0. Okay, factor out the 3. That gives us x squared minus 49 is equal to 0. Okay, x squared minus 49. Recognize that that is a product of squares. Okay, so that is 3 times x minus 7 times x plus 7 is equal to 0. So that means x minus 7 is equal to 0, or x plus 7 is equal to 0. So x is either plus or minus 7. And you can write that like this, plus or minus 7. And often when we write our solution sets for these, we write them as a set of numbers with the brackets around them. So x is equal to the solution set plus or minus 7. Okay, quadratic equations will have at most 2 real number solutions. The zero product property can be applied to equations with higher degrees after they've been factored. An equation that looks like 4x cubed is equal to 14x squared plus 8x could have up to 3 real number solutions because that has a degree of 3. Okay, example number 6. Find the solution set for 4x cubed is equal to 14x squared plus 8x. Step number 1, put this into standard form, setting it equal to 0. So that means we're going to subtract 14x squared and 8x from both sides. So that's going to give us 4x cubed minus 14x squared minus 8x is equal to 0. Factor out 2x to begin our factoring process. That gives us 2x squared minus 7x minus 4 is equal to 0. Okay, now continue to factor this trinomial. 2x times 2x squared minus 8x plus 1x minus 4 is equal to 0. 2x times, remember we group these guys now, So 2x comes out. We're left with x minus 4 plus 1 times x minus 4. Now we have that common binomial that we're looking for. Okay. And I'm going to write that so it's just a little bit clearer to see those brackets right there. Okay. That gives us 2x times 2x plus 1 times x minus 4. So now you can see that we have 3 possible solutions for x because this can equal 0, this can equal 0, or this can equal 0. So 2x is equal to 0, or 2x plus 1 is equal to 0, or x minus 4 is equal to 0. Okay? Obviously, in the first one, x is equal to 0. 2x plus 1, okay, we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. That's going to give us 2x is equal to negative 1. Divide by 2, x is equal to negative 1/2. Add 4 to both sides. X is equal to 4 over here. So the possible solution set for this one is x is equal to negative 1/2, 0, and 4. Those are our possible solutions for this one, okay? Dividing both sides of an equation by a variable expression causes a solution to be lost. Dividing both sides of the original equation in 6 by x would eliminate the solution of 0. Some word problems require you to solve a quadratic equation. Be sure to set the equation equal to 0 before factoring and apply your zero product property. So here is example number 7. An architect wishes to design a room for a home addition in which the length is 5 feet longer than the width. Okay? If the room needs to be 204 feet squared, find the dimensions. So width is just equal to width, okay? And the length is 5 feet longer than the width. So length is equal to W plus 5, okay? The dimensions of the room, and we're talking about area because it says 204 feet squared. We know that area of a rectangle is equal to L times W. So fill in our variables here. We know that the area of the room needs to be 204 feet squared. The length is W plus 5, and the width is W. Okay? Solve that, or at least simplify that. W squared plus 5W is equal to 204. We are going to solve this as a quadratic equation, okay? So step number 1 is to put this into standard form of a quadratic equation by subtracting 204 from both sides. That gives us W squared plus 5W minus 204 is equal to 0, okay? Factors of negative 204 that the sum is equal to 5, 17, and negative 12. So W plus 17 times W minus 12 is equal to 0. Okay, so W plus 17 is equal to 0, or please don't do that right now. W minus 12 is equal to 0. Add 17 to both sides. Sorry, subtract 17 from both sides. Add 12 to both sides. W is equal to negative 17. W is equal to 12. So our dimensions of our room, can W be negative 17? No, the dimensions of a room can't, the width of the room can't be negative 17. So we know the only possibility for W is 12. So 12, length is W plus 5, so length is 17. Those are the dimensions of the room that the architect can create.